Hi, I'm Jen, and you should be registered to vote. This week, we are going to talk about one of my absolute favorite subjects, and that is fanfiction. I love fanfiction, I love fanfiction writers, and I love you if you're part of a fanfiction community. First, a quick little history lesson on fanfiction in its current iteration. It all began in the 1960s with a group of women who created Star Trek fanzines, which are these handmade, hand-distributed little masterpieces. And that's how people used to get out their fanfiction, is writing them down, creating these fanzines, photocopying them, sending them out. The women who created these zines were doing them to essentially carve out space in a fandom that felt very male-dominated. And these zines were certainly not the first time that fans of a work created their own versions. Even back with Sherlock Holmes, there were pastiches that were serialized and being published while Arthur Conan Doyle was still writing his original work. I have attended hours of convention panels on fanfiction, its legitimacy, its feminist implications, whether or not we should be creating it, its history, all that kind of stuff. I don't plan on covering all that ground today. It would be completely impossible. But just know that if you wanted to do some research of your own, it would be very easy to fall down a rabbit hole of information and still probably miss a whole bunch of stuff. Of course, today, most fanfiction can be found online, and it's gone massively mainstream. Works like 50 Shades of Grey, After, and The Kissing Booth all started in fan communities. And now, of course, they have traditional publications, and they've been adapted to movies and TV. Even before those major breakouts, properties like Star Wars, Power Rangers, and Stranger Things have expanded their universe by officially sanctioning fanfiction and hiring writers to create stories outside of the original work. Fanfiction can lead to some seriously major business deals. Not to mention, if you're trying to break into TV writing, editors and hiring managers will ask for something called a spec script, which is where you write your own version of a TV show that already exists. And you need to be able to do that in order to work on a team of writers within a framework that already exists. So you've got to have a lot of spec scripts kind of in your portfolio in order to even get those kinds of job applications. I kept thinking of the word audition. Not an audition, a writer audition. And even if you don't have your eye on professional writing, fanfiction writers are, for the most part, lovely and talented people. They pour their passion into their work, and they deserve to call themselves writers. So let's just get that out of the way right now. If you're writing fanfiction, you're writing. You're practicing your craft. You may even be taking part in collaborative editing and putting together things for collections and sharing your work with other people. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. So why does fanfiction have a bad reputation? Not to sound like a broken record, but mostly it has to do with the demographic. Fanfiction is still mostly written and read by young women. And that's the core of the problem. People seem to react negatively to things that women and teenage girls really like, which is super dumb because marketing and ad folks make their entire careers out of figuring out what women and teenage girls like, packaging it, repeating it, and then selling it. Teen girls are the pulse of culture, whether it's because they're so heavily marketed to or because they tend to get really enthusiastic over the stuff they like the Beatles or Twilight. And then these things, like the Beatles and Twilight, become super, super popular and people get really cynical and negative about them. And then they become jokes in the zeitgeist. Maybe not the Beatles, but definitely Twilight. Outside of that, however, fanfiction gets a bad rap because it's easily accessible and often sexual or taboo. There's tons of innocent fanfiction and tons of writers that create their work just because they want to. But there are others who use fanfiction and fan works to either work through some of their past trauma or to help others work through theirs. There are some who connect with a character and want to explore that a little bit more. And there are some that are just kind of kinky and want to write a sexy fic. Over the years, various online fanfiction communities have been purged and censored, and that led to the creation of the Organization of Transformative Works, which is where Archive of Our Own came from. Again, I could do a whole video on censorship and arguments online against pedophilic content, rape, abuse, all that kind of stuff. And while I'm against censorship, the impulse here was to protect kids from stumbling onto that kind of content, which isn't a bad idea, because I'll be honest, I was a 13-year-old kid lying about my age in order to read explicit content online. passing floppy disks back and forth between my friends so that we could read chapters at home. And now you know how old I am, which is fine. The fact that I have been reading fan fiction for almost 20 years now should tell you that I am pro fan fiction. Pretty much always, unequivocally. Almost. Because there are some bad practices in fan fiction and the community that should just be canceled. First of all, we should stop showing fan fiction and fan works to actors, creators, writers with the express intent of embarrassing them. Stop asking them what they think about the kinky shit that their characters do online. I don't know why this became a trend, but in the last 5 to 10 years, talk show hosts and professional interviewers have started bringing this stuff up, going so far as to read some of it or show art on the air. The art is usually slash, which is a male-male relationship that's not usually canon, and the artwork is typically explicit. So what ends up happening is that everyone involved gets embarrassed, and the author or artist, if they get credited, typically winds up the target of a lot of abuse and online bullying. There are definitely actors, writers, and other creators that are all for fan fiction and fan works. And if they want to see it, they can seek it out on their own. They, however, should be allowed to choose how and when they're exposed to it. The Beetlejuice musical, which has officially closed, had walls of fan art backstage, which is fine. But again, the vast majority of that fan art was sent into the theater, screened by the stage manager, and then put up for the actors to see, which means that there was some curating going on. Even when actors like Oscar Isaac are vocal of supporting a pairing like Finn and Poe, it doesn't mean we should tag him in art or send him fic or ask him questions at conventions about the weirdest stuff that we've read. He can find that content himself, just like the rest of us, and he can control what he sees and stay away from anything that makes him uncomfortable. Another negative part to sending fan art and fan work to the creators themselves is that while actors don't typically own the characters that they portray, writers do. And there are some writers who really hate fan fiction and their creators. They may even pursue legal action if it crosses a line. Diana Gabaldon, who wrote Outlander, Anne Rice of the Lestat series and other horror works, George R.R. Martin, who wrote Game of Thrones, and Orson Scott Card, who wrote Ender's Game, have all historically hated fan fiction, and they've been very vocal about it. Card eventually changed his tune, but not before vitriolic reactions to creators of fan works. And there's a lot of gray legal area when it comes to the world of intellectual property. I would have to do another whole separate video about legal limits when it comes to ideas, Creative Commons, the public domain versus copyright and trademark. And you should just know that if you're ever pursued by George R.R. Martin and his lawyers, you're going to lose. Something else that's come up a lot more often as the internet and social media have become more popular is that sending spec scripts or ideas about things that someone is working on makes it then impossible for them to use that idea in canon. So if you're trying to email ideas or tweet them to an author of a popular comic book series because you want to see Green Lantern hook up with the entire X-Men team, I don't know how that would work. Are they even the same? Anyway, if you sent something like that to someone who is a writer on Green Lantern or X-Men, they could now never use that idea. They can never use representation ideas that you send in to them. So that would mean that if you really wanted to see someone who's handicapped and have written a script about that and send it in, it can then never be brought up because you could sue them for intellectual property ideas. And in order to avoid that, they will completely not use that idea. So don't do it. Don't send the ideas in. The second bad practice in the world of fan fiction that I actually haven't seen as much as I used to is going in and reading something that you find objectionable just to leave mean comments. It used to be called a flame, and it was like an all caps tirade that someone would leave telling the writer either how bad their work was or how evil they are for creating it and how they're like ruining the world. First of all, that is a lot of energy you could be using on literally anything else. Second of all, the writer of the objectionable fiction might have done it just to get a reaction out of people. In which case, you're giving them what they were looking for and getting angry over something that's actually making them laugh. So, it's kind of a waste of your energy for a lot of different reasons. If you're going in to leave those kinds of comments in order to shame the creator, as I explained before, you never really know why a writer wrote something. They could be doing it just to get a rise out of you, but they also could be doing it to work through something that happened in their life that was super traumatic. You can't really know the writer's intent unless they include it in an author's note. Kind of in general, the rule don't like, don't read should apply to anything you can imagine. Because if you can imagine it, it likely exists on the internet. A final bad practice that people should just stop doing is misusing the tagging system. Now, this is especially relevant on Archive of Our Own, which has one of the most sophisticated tagging systems on the internet right now. Not only can you tag things that you included in your fiction when you're writing and posting it, but then when you're going to look for something to read, you can actually click on tags to exclude them from your search. So if there's something you don't even want to see in your search results, you can take care of that while you're creating that filter. Some writers love to overtag, and they do that typically in order to increase hits on their work, which is not actually helpful to them or to their readers. So if someone's writing a story about Thor watching Doctor Who, and they tag both Thor and Doctor Who as major fandoms in their work, that's not really chill, because you go there looking for something that has to do with like Thor and Doctor Who going on an adventure. Doctor Who is just sort of a passing mention, and then you're just going to be disappointed. And someone's either not going to leave you kudos or a comment or anything like that, or they're going to get really mad and never read anything you write ever again. Bad news bears. The other misuse of the tagging system is not tagging, especially if there's something that is objectionable content in your story. The AO3 database specifically has warnings that are high-level triggers or things that someone may not ever want to see on the website at all. There are things like rape or dubious consent or extreme violence that you can just say, this is an archive warning, and people can kind of click that and exclude it from their search. A lot of authors don't either know how to use that tagging system, or they're under tagging pretty much to get people to read their work despite the objectionable content, which is not really great. It's not healthy. It's not friendly. Don't do it. Even with all the negative elements, I'm still 100% here for fan works and their creators. The fanfiction community is robust and super active, and it's received tons of serious recognition. AO3 even won a Hugo last year for Best Related Work, and that's the biggest honor that you can get for sci-fi and fantasy. Fanfiction writers often have a relationship with something called a beta reader, which is another person who reads their work, edits it for them, and sends it back before it gets posted. Writers take part in challenges and in collections. They organize swaps or gift exchanges, and that means taking part in a fanfiction community could encourage regular writing, submitting on a schedule, getting comfortable receiving feedback, taking it into account before you continue writing, all things that are really important to serious professional writers. Just because you're working with someone else's character or playing in someone else's world does not make you a less legitimate writer. The other great thing about fanfiction is that the community tries to make their work as accessible as possible. Podfics, where writers will either record a story themselves or have someone else do it for them, have become incredibly popular, and they increase accessibility. There are many other ways that fanfiction writers and fan work creators have increased representation, especially in the last few years. Reading fanfic can also help you out as a writer. It helps you recognize story elements, character development that you don't like or that you do really like, and it can also help you understand why something like a purely fluff piece does not make for a great novel. There's no conflict, there's no change of scene, there's no action that's happening. It's just a couple of people curled up on a couch watching TV together, which is fine and lovely and a wonderful little scene to fill in the blanks, but it does not a novel make. As a writer or reader, fanfiction can help you in other ways as well. It can help you explore your sexual preferences and your orientation, and it should by no means replace a proper sex education at all. You should definitely not be taking fanfiction as gospel. There's a lot of stuff that happens in there that just not good. But it's an okay way to supplement what you're learning or not learning in school. And if you read about something that you're unsure of, you should seek out a reliable source to find out more. Someone or some source that you trust, a book or a website online or a parent, I don't know, guidance counselor? Do people still have guidance counselors? Something like that. Anyway, don't just try stuff at home that you read about online. The skills do not transfer. Fanfiction can be therapeutic. It can be something you take as seriously or as lightly as you want. It can be fun. It can be a good way to work through your anger or your sadness. Fanfiction can be whatever you want it to be. Just don't send a link to John Boyega. This week on Advice Jen Can Dish Out But She Can't Take. Submit your work, please. Get your AO3 account. Get a Wattpad username. Sign up for fanfiction.net. Do whatever you need to do. Fuck around on LiveJournal if you really don't want anyone reading your work. Post online and do it publicly. Use the right tags, and you will find your readers. Let people read your work and respond to the comments, good or bad. Take yourself seriously as a writer, even if you're just writing fan fiction. You're still writing and you're still working on your craft. This is the same process you go through when you're a professional writer. You submit your work to the public, usually a pretty specific public, and then you get feedback and sometimes make changes before resubmitting it. The fanfiction community is forgiving, but certainly not all positive all the time, and they will give you criticisms if you ask for them. Sometimes the anonymity of the internet actually works to our advantage. As always, thank you guys for tuning in and watching this video. If you have thoughts on fanfiction, if you read or write it, whatever, leave comments down below. Be sure to click on the subscribe button and give us a thumbs up and click that bell to be notified every time there's a new video, which right now is every 2 weeks. If you want more of my content, you can follow me on Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter, and now you can follow me on Instagram at WriteWithAPendragon, where I'm doing monthly book challenges and posting almost daily. As always, thank you for watching, and stay safe and healthy.
Are you always this articulate?
Hercules. My name is Hercules.